I still remember quite vividly the first time I read Tolkien's The Hobbit, classic book. I've got several editions now, and that's sort of one of my go-tos. When I was in my adolescence, I read it for the first time, and it's one I've been back to read several times because it's just a fascinating tale that, you know, it's really engaging. So I think, yeah, those are the things that are important.
There's a book that I absolutely adore, and when I've written a book myself, I always say to myself, now, is this book that I have written as good as this one, which I love? And the book that I'm talking about is a book called Owl Babies by Martin Waddell. It is heaven. It's so exciting. It's so short. It's so dramatic. It's so heart-stopping. The characters are so funny and so fantastic. And the ending is so marvelous that you think, oh, I want to do that. Owl Babies by Martin Waddell.
My favourite story is usually the one that I'm reading at the moment, and it's also, or the one before it, because if it's really bad, it's not the one that I'm reading at the moment. Also a book that perhaps moved me along in my thoughts and my understanding of life a little bit. One that I really, if I read it now, it doesn't mean so much to me, but when I first read it, A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, it really opened up to me the thought that back in the day, women didn't have the opportunity to live the lives that we live now. And she was saying that all women needed was £500 and a room of their own. And then they could be themselves, and so that would have to be my favourite book, because it made me think, oh, what do I want to do? And what do I need to do to be able to, what do I need to be able to do what I want to do, not as mother, daughter, sister. Do you know what I mean? As for me, myself. I think I was in that generation between like my mother's generation, where there was no opportunity whatsoever unless she was completely driven or one of a kind, for her to make a life for herself within a marriage. Do you know what I mean? Whereas my generation, I think a lot of people were starting to go, oh yeah, did this, got married, had the kids, and what now? Yeah.
My favourite story, certainly in Australian history and fiction, would be Henry Handel Richardson's The Fortunes of Richard Marnie, which is a huge triple-decker novel written in the early part of the 20th century. And it's a story of a man, a doctor, an Irish doctor, who comes to the Victorian goldfields but is never at home. And so it's very much an immigrant story. It's very powerful. It's so powerful that the first time I read it, I felt depressed actually at the end of it all, because it's a very sad story of a man who eventually loses his mind. But it's, I think, one of the great stories that has been told about Australia. It's been inspiration for many historians, although it's not a history. It's based, Richardson, or Ethel Robertson as she was, based it on her father's letters, the letters between her father and her mother. So it's very much based on her family history, but it's not a family history. It's very much a novel. It's a modernist novel, certainly by the time we get towards the end. The last of the trilogy was written in the 1920s, and so she's influenced by, I guess, the whole stream of consciousness thing by that stage. And it's an immensely powerful story about, it is about colonial Australia, but I think more generally just about the human condition.
I remember the last time, and I was terrified, and I suddenly realised, look, I may only have another few minutes or even 30 seconds. I'm not going to waste the last few minutes of my life just being scared. And I deliberately went back to the most beautiful, the most meaningful moments of my life. And I just relived them. I am lucky to have that. Well, I used to have an eidetic memory. It's not quite that good anymore. And I just went back to relive those moments. And so, look, I think those are my favourite stories. The sequel to Miss Lily's Lovely Ladies, the heroine is actually waiting for the result of an operation on the man she loves. And Liz was saying, oh, how did you know? I mean, that's incredible. And of course it was It was word for word what it was like waiting for my husband with a 9-hour operation. That it comes from somewhere. So my favourite stories are the moments of just transcendental joy in my life, of just extraordinary, incredible joy.
My favourite story, because I was brought up in a Christian environment, my grandparents, we would always have biblical stories that we would love to read. And I always loved the story of Queen Esther, that she would come into the kingdom for such a time as to be there for her people. And I feel that me as a modern day Queen Esther, a modern day, I feel that I am right here, meant to be here to represent the Aboriginal, the Torres Strait and Australian South Sea Islander today.
I love autobiographies. I love reading about other people's, lives, and especially, because they're the true stories, and factual. And some people have got interesting lives. I love reading the history, because our people have written their stories about their lives, about what happened to them, from colonisation to where we are today. And inspiring stories about, the struggle and about our education is the key that opened doors for us. So I encourage our young people, I love to talk to young people about education.
There was a story, Abby Yo-Yo, that I've told countless times, which I heard and adapted from Pete Seeger. So I heard it in a concert, and then like 20 years later I was presenting it myself, and I think that kind of symbolises how powerful the story was. I mean, it involves some singing and music and engagement in it, but the fun that's involved in unpacking that.